somehow.
And maybe this particular happened.
I don't necessarily understand
Somebody else will come.
the
A
background.
bunch of them, somebody else will come to a different place.
Right.
But by then, this maybe not be so. So I guess it's
We're stuck in a rock part classes.
I don't know. We'll see what happens.
We'll see.
I know what I will say is I hope not.
Did it get busted yesterday?
Not too bad.
I was gonna say that doesn't look bad. Yeah, it's just protect the phone.
I can't do
There's the hand.
Funny enough, I've been thinking.
Yeah, go ahead. We have a couple minutes.
Yeah.
I remember thinking about myself. Where I'm going and it's a split session.
Yeah. I'm glad you're up.
Yeah, she's got to go upstairs.
A few bruises.
I didn't realize I hit the shoulder.
You've been taking Advil.
I take a bullet, take a I don't know. It doesn't have much.
Yeah.
It's okay.
That's hopefully something.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, right. Okay.
Come on, Luna, how are you feeling after yesterday? Are you sore? I bet you are.
I'm sorry.
Are you okay?
No, I'm okay. I'm just fairly bruised up. The whole thing coming outside for some reason.
Well, that
I was on the street for
Could be worse. I keep saying could be worse.
yes.
I was on the Oh, I didn't see that. I guess what you sent again, I didn't see it, so sorry. Never mind. I see it now.
Did you know the chairman's notes sheet? Is that joke for him? Is that what you
A long board. I did ask them to print out one thing to do.
Oh, it's all right. If not, I could just throw something there. Yeah, it's one of these. I'm just thinking like one of these. Do you have another one of those?
There should be 6 of those. There should be 6.
Here's one. I'll just use this one. I'll just use John's until he gets here.
No, it's not. This is still just left, right?
The final one they did. Okay. I think this is the final one. So John.
Yeah, but there's not a.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he called me and asked for your number. Like,
I missed it.
I think with all this.
For lunch.
Sort of the political background.
The lunch.
Was he dropping back to the on the top?
Yeah, staff recommendations.
This is so much.
Oh, okay.
Yes, no.
Yeah, this one. But where's the
The low line is all
this is just
It's been going on in the background for a while.
You know, that's really funny that you mentioned that because I went back to look at this and I
Whatever we
noticed that as
discussed.
well. I've been sure or this week we're supposed to end for
5 o'clock. Want to make sure that they know we're interested about it. When they talk about it. 5 p.m. on next Thursday in council.
So
Community development.
yes,
Yep. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the August 10th, 2022 in-person meeting of the AR Large. My name is Jay White. I'll be the acting chair until our normal chair, John Robinson, arrives at some point. Other board members here with me this evening are Lou Subchuck, James Metters, Stephen Brown. We're supported by the staff assistance of Tori Parrish and Morris Courtney. The order of the meeting is as follows. There will be a brief introduction or overview of each item by city staff. I think we'll limit that to 10 seconds. Or however much you actually need, because I don't want you to have
Seconds past all right.
That's right. That's right. And it's over. Then applicant presentation, we try to keep those to 10 minutes. If you need additional time, please ask me prior to the onset of the presentation. And then there'll be an opportunity for public comment. Now, public comment in person, that's pretty obvious, but written public comment is distributed to the board prior to the meeting, and that's why it is due at 12 noon the day prior to the meeting. Although this is being broadcast live via YouTube, there's no interaction electronically. That'll be followed by city staff comments and recommendations, and then a 2-minute period for an applicant clarification or response to either anything that was said during public comment or the city staff comments. That would then lead to board discussion and a vote. And at that time, the only way that the applicant might interact with the board during discussion and vote is if there's some inaccuracy floating about the discussion. If that is the case, then alert me and we'll give you an opportunity to clarify. But specifically, we're trying to prevent any sort of back and forth dialogue between applicant and board. Just so you know, items 5 and 6 have been withdrawn by the applicant. I'll also state that I'm getting over a cold. It left me voiceless for a couple of days, which I think answered many, many prayers, but I've come out on the other side of that. Please turn off all cell phones or other disruptive electronic devices. And remember to keep your comments limited to architecture. The scope of this board is strictly the architectural effect of what we're dealing with. So issues of parking, trash, noise, traffic, and the like are the purviews of other boards and conditions. So with that, may we begin?
We'll start. So we've got some additional protocol.
Oh, that's right.
These, this is public comment you've already covered, board members and meeting procedures. So we'll go to the next slide. Main participation, we've got actually that covered and public comment was received. So I think we're good to go.
Any questions? All right.
All right. Just I keep it quick. So, all right, starting with agenda item number 1, which is review and hopefully approval of the July 27th meeting minutes.
Move for approval.
Motion made, second. Second by Mr. Brown. All those in favor? Any opposed? The ayes have it. Approved as submitted.
Item number 2 is 40 Line Street. This is a new construction project. The board was out yesterday for review of the mock-up panel. Some context slides. Showing you the location on Line Street. Line Street's to the south. Your gal's presenting.
Thank you. Richard Gow with LS3P. I'm here with my associates John and Alan and the ownership and construction team from Lifestyle Communities. I'm also speaking on behalf of the design architect, Ramsa, who couldn't be with us today here, but they were at the meeting yesterday. And as was suggested in the meeting yesterday, since we got some new numbers, it's recommended that maybe we take just a few minutes and walk around the plan and look at the elevations and make sure we understand what we saw yesterday. And if at any point it seems like redundant, and you really got it, I'll shut up and we'll get to the deliberations.
I'll give you the signal.
Okay. So what you have,
This time.
what you have here is Line Street, Meeting Street, I-26 entrance. The low line is here. This is the train shed. This is the enclave. These are not a part of this presentation. And the original design for this building was to break it up into pieces so it didn't look like a majorly massive building. And so there are parts. This is the gateway building, the head house building, the annex building, and the bridge building. And so each of these mock-up sections were representative of those major components. And if you look here, this is the Meeting Street building with the head house in front on Line Street. It's actually one of the front doors to the building, and it was the smallest panel kind of on the back side. This is the gateway building, which you see from every direction, the annex building and the bridge building. And it's called the bridge building because you can walk through it at this point. And this is the annex building because it feels like it's connected by a hyphen between the gateway and connected by that bridge. So that's the view from the south. And then this is the Meeting Street elevation, and this is blocked right now with a lot of small houses. And this is really where the main problem of the building starts. And this has been referred to as the lobby building or the bank building. And the golden canopy that was a lot of topic of discussion yesterday is really here. And those colors exist on the side here. This is the side of the head house building. And this is the cut line, and the remainder of the gateway building is here, and the two canopies, or the canopies are here, here, and here, that were represented on the mock-up as well. And as you are aware, or may not be, because of COVID, the contractor asked us to come in some time ago and talk through getting the brick and precast going because of the need to actually embed the brick into the precast. So that's been approved for some time. And it's clear that, 92% of this building is brick and precast. And so a lot of what we were looking at yesterday was the relationship of these brick colors to the more painted elements and elements of FRP versus hardwood. And there were a couple of deviations from the mock-up panel, which if you wanted to go through the slideshow, I mean, it's hard to really read these mock-up drawings, but the idea is that there were a couple of things such as on the annex building, or the lobby building, we were asking for the ability to use precast instead of limestone. And on the base plates or the panels on the gateway building, we wanted to use an FRP versus hardwood. And we spent some time and looked at that. But I think everything else is pretty much as shown. And so we're really pleased with a lot of the quality that we saw. Gate Precasting does a great job. And so we're here to get whatever comments you can offer us, ask for approval of whatever you can give us. In the scheme of building a building of this scale, one of the most important things is the long lead order items. And the most important really thing that we would like to meet from the grant is an approval of purchasing the grand windows, because that's a longer lead item. The color can be determined later on. And another thing is that if there was a little bit of commotion yesterday about the paint colors, and there's some discussion about whether or not paint color should necessarily be a board purview. And I don't really want to get into that discussion, but we are willing to work with the staff at a later date to kind of talk through the paint colors. And frankly, we would like that to happen, because the ownership team would like to review them. And so we don't really want approved alternate paint colors tonight, but we would like the Graham window and then any other commentary that you would offer. But I leave it at that.
Great, thanks. All right, any questions from the board to the applicant? Any public comment? Any staff comments and recommendations?
One, it should be noted that this mock-up took an inordinate amount of time to complete. Therefore, staff has requested a 5-minute reintroduction of the exterior materials of this large mixed-use project, as it has been quite a while since the board saw the project and the composition of the board has changed. Staff has asked the applicant to prepare a comparison of what materials were initially approved and those for which the applicant is now asking for substitutions or modifications. And I'd like to note that the board did receive that today. And 3, although it would have been ideal to see how the window elements work in the bridge building, one can fill in the gaps as this palette is simple. We're recommending final approval of the board staff comments, and if not approved, staff recommends approval of the Graham windows in a color to be determined by the board.
Okay. Verification. Well, completely. All right. Sure. Board discussion?
I did have a question. So what was not shown yesterday on the mock-ups that would need to come back as part of the mock-up or an extension to the mock-up? Is there anything? The windows, obviously.
Well, the windows were installed, and we were asking for maybe a couple of the windows to have a slightly different color. But the Graham window itself was the one that was.
So everything that's on this sheet that summarizes.
That's something.
That's what I thought that your mock-up was of the highest quality mock-up that I had seen. Okay, and I had a fun conversation about it. So congratulations on that. Whoever's got that responsibility, guys. I thought it was good.
Board comments?
I was asking, do we need to go through this and understand where's changes? So I was not there yesterday, so maybe it's redundant.
It seems like most of the changes actually pertain to issues of color, and I would suggest that color is something that staff is well equipped to figure out. You don't want to get the board off. Any
The only comment that I have is that the placement of the palette, I know this sounds ridiculous, but the placement was behind a locked gate for the public to be able to review it and provide appropriate comments. I think it would be more appropriate in the future and for any architect to make it available to the public for a certain amount of time before the BAR meeting, that it would be presented, or all the time. I know that the neighborhood does not always allow for something like that to happen, but just for future reference, I think we appreciate public comment and giving them the opportunity to see it and engage with it before a meeting would be appropriate. But and no other comment.
Well, I'll add quickly, the build quality of the mock-up is actually very high. I think it says a lot that you said 92% of the building is precast concrete. The other 8% is factory formed aluminum of some sort or other. So virtually, other than the silicone sealant joints. There's no field work in it. So it's a factory made building. That's the future, frankly. And a motion from the board.
Make a motion for final approval for the mock-up notes with board staff comments.
All right. Motion made for final approval with board and staff comments. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. 4-0. Thank you.
We appreciate the board's time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Number 3 is 678 and 666 King Street, requesting preliminary approval for construction of a 55-unit affordable housing project. Context slides. Aerial, to show you, this is south of FH&I Street, one kind of half block to the east of King. And a few existing site photos. Here, Brian Fessler's presenting this one.
All right. We have a few prompts here. We'll get to as we go through this.
So I thank you for your time. I'm Brian Fessler with Millen Housing Smith Architecture. Our developer client, Robinson with NFP Development, is here as well, in case there are some questions related to the development side of the project. We're here today to request preliminary approval with final, if possible, and with final approval at the staff level, city staff level. I think most of you have seen the project before, so I want to be brief on this, but I don't want to go too quickly. So if there's some questions, we can get more in depth with those. Project's 55-unit housing development, 100% affordable. I know there's some questions from the community previously about the mix of it is the studios, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom. And the mix is 11 studios, 21 bedroom, 16 2 bedroom, and 8 3 bedroom. We received some comments at the conceptual level that we'll address through here, primarily related to how the building develops at the detail level. The packet you'll see here is more a refinement of the proportions, the window details, how the cornice is developed, how it's engaged at the street level with the porches. But it's very similar, massing-wise to what we had before with a few refinements. So next, please. I think we can go through the project site pretty quickly. This project will connect. You see, there's primarily two sites to this student address. One is 678 King Street, which the building is primarily located on. And then there's also 666 King Street, where it's under the overpass, where an access point to the future low-line park system will be developed. And we'll get into the site. I should have said this before. Because this project has a little bit bigger scope than other ones, I'd like to request a total time of 15 minutes for the okay. Stephen with Remark is our landscape architect. He'll go more in depth in the site, but I will approach this more from the building standpoint. Next, please. Next, please. Context-wise, there isn't too much context, but the one thing we want to emphasize here, and you'll see this later with the colors, is the two buildings that are most prominent in this neighborhood are the two housing authority buildings that have a bright blue or gold yellow to them. And that relates to what our building is trying to do contextually in terms of some of our colors. Next, please. Next, I think we can go past the site photos. The building's on King Street, but it has no King Street frontage. Site plan will really, Stephen will get in more detail on this, but from big picture overview, it's really going to clean that area up and address some of the parking, the dumpster trash concerns that are there. They'll have parking for existing housing authority in improved fashion, the new development, and public access to the low-line park system and restaurants and businesses along King Street area. Next, please. Contextual elevations. For the elevations, I want to primarily look at it at the detail level. I mean, the massing is about similar to what we had before, so I think we can skip through these. And the new elevations you can kind of see there are very similar, with the exception when we get to a little bit farther, you'll see the development of the upper 5th story and the 1st story. I think is a little bit more refined in terms of the way the windows are proportioned, reveals, and the cornice level. Next, please. Keep going until we get to the next. Next I think we want to come back. I think the floor plan is next after all of this. Oh, we got some perspectives. Okay. Exterior is a mix of brick and poly ash siding. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with that, but we brought a board of it. It's a composite material similar to fiber cement. The reason we're proposing this material is due to manufacturing logistic challenges from the fiber cement market. A lot of the thicker pieces and profiles that the board, I think, favors are just not readily available in fiber cement anymore. So polyash is a comparable, durable material. So in some ways, it's superior to the fiber ash, particularly in how the ends are cut. Yeah.
Take a closer look.
Yep. Just leave this here if you pass around. The profile we're looking for is the one most on the right, the nickel reveal. It comes in a simulated wood grain and a smooth profile, similar to polyash. So we're proposing a nickel reveal with a smooth profile.
This gets you the thickness you were looking for. This gets you the thickness you were looking for.
Correct. Particularly with the end trim pieces. The other materials are brick. We have an aluminum fence. And aluminum clad windows. The upper units are typically single hung, and then the ground level community activated space is aluminum clad. Next, please. This is the view from F Street, which will be opened as part of this project. Another view that shows the 5 and 4 story massive pieces. This one gives you a good handle on the brick reveals, how the balconies were developed since last time. They're a little bit more unified language with that steel edge channel. It's consistent through the building now, and then also more integrated into the canopies over at the amenities and public way. Next, please. The porches, they activate the street over the this living unit side, have brick risers and treads. We have two bricks on this project with comparable custom mortar colors. The window sills will be the darker brick, and the field brick will be lighter brick. So the only place the darker brick will be the window sills and the steps at the porch level. So it's primarily the field brick. To view the courtyard, but you want to talk about a little bit more. Next, please. View from the low line. Next, please. View from the low line. So one change that I do want to note up from previously is we do have a ramp off of the community porch in the back now. That was a comment from TRC. So I think we found a way to integrate that in there where it doesn't look like an appendage, and it still creates the feel of that community porch that we had before. That's one difference from before. Next, please. View of one of the approaches to the low line. We'll talk about next, please. View from the underneath the overpass. Next, please. View from the approach into the city of Charleston. Next, please. View the entrance of the leasing office and the community spaces. Detail-wise, one detail that has changed from the previous submittal is related to the corner detail, the polyash panels. They previously were proposing a seamless corner for the outside corners. The more we looked into that from the manufacturer, they seem to not be promoting that anymore. We haven't done that in a building, so we were proposing an aluminum corner reveal there instead, but it'd be a similar look. I think it's going to be. I mean, we could see what that looks like in the mock-up now, but since the manufacturer doesn't seem to endorse it anymore, I'm hesitant to proceed on with that. Next, please. Next, please. The dumpster enclosure has been developed. That was one of the topics we talked about previously. It's a similar language to the building in terms of the brick reveals and colors. It also incorporates some of the language of the wood panel fencing that will be in the site as well. I think that is a change with this from the previous submission. We now have a emergency generator on the site that we've enclosed in this structure as well. One thing I would ask the board if they would consider would be to leave the emergency generator exposed and landscaped if it's that would be acceptable. The reason I propose that is I think the overall size of this enclosure just keeps getting bigger and bigger. I think it might be better from the public standpoint if they were not screening, particularly because from the approach from King Street, the dumpster enclosure already provides screening of this device. So something to think about. We'll gladly screen it if we need to, but I think it might serve the project better if it wasn't screened. Next, please. Floor plans are very similar to what we had before. You can see the community porch with the ramp that's going to be developed here. And then I think we can skip up to the roof plan. That's the other change we got here. We had some fortunate news on the roof. Mechanical equipment actually was a little bit smaller than we anticipated. It doesn't happen every day. So we were able to corral all those units in a little bit tighter. Everything's still on the 5th floor in the least visible spot, but still has a screen wall around it. Next, please. Here's an axometric view of the building where you can see a little bit more of the reveals get a little lost in here, but they're more of a rusticated first level and then a series of reveals that fill up the facade as it goes up. The multiple cornice types. The 4th floor portion of the building is a little bit more simplified. It's a little more elaborate on the 5th floor version of it. Next, please. World elevations kind of aren't, it's probably mostly brick and then some of the painted polyash siding. Next, please. I think we can skip the building section. There's some details after this. Brick steps to the porches and community spaces. Both brick and polyash siding come to the ground in different ways. Next, please. See the multiple cornice profiles depending on the materials and where they're located in the building. Some of the brick details. The aluminum cornice is an aluminum profile shape. There's you can kind of see it over there. Next, please. This sheet shows some of the details of the balconies and the interim canopy and how that's been developed. Next, please. So the window type primarily single hung and then a more fixed window ground level. One of the big comments from the AR previously was making sure that we had enough depth. The specific request for it was for a minimum 8-inch depth. The windows were in the brick, so these are the details to accommodate that. So jam details there. Next, please. Typical window and door details. Next, please. And now I'm going to defer the rest of the time to Stephen with remarks to kind of go into the site portion of that.
Good, 45 seconds remaining.
I'll be quick since we are just since I just answered. Again, Steve D'Amato, Remark Studio. Doing the landscape portion for this project. I'll focus more on the under or overpass portion where the parking is located. One specific comment that the board had specified before was the circulation, how users from King Street get back to our site and how that all kind of ties together, relates together. I think if we kind of go through the slides pretty quickly, we'll get to some colored elevations showing the color palette that Brian specified earlier with the green and the black. Bottom right-hand corner, this is one of our main entrances to the low line. We've had multiple conversations with people at low line, hoping that to be one of the more main trailheads to the low line. And then one of the questions was, or one of the concerns from the board was, how do we screen this portion of the area or portion of the project from the public, since it is a parking lot. Something that's a little more solid, but can also be moved at the same time. So we propose some movable decorative pots. Again, the color palette would relate strictly right back to the building using that green. And then they would also vary in heights. And that was part of the old presentation, but just to reiterate, based on this lower right hand portion of the slide currently, there is a fence there now. We would technically it's on our site, but it will be transformed into some sort of cord 10 metal welded wire fencing of some sort, so it provides that screening portion, but it's not totally cutting down the visibility of the site due to its overpass, providing such a dark space. We go to some of the later slides. Just some of the color palettes, the materials, relating back to the low line. This is a little more refined site plan showing the connection between King Street, ultimately through the parking garage back to the low line and then to our site. Just shows the outline of the site. We'll just breeze through them. Like I said before, this is a lot of the same material that we showed the last BAR presentation. One thing to note was we still kept that fire lane access directly adjacent to the building. This will be permeable pavers, more of a grayish or tan materials kind of relate back to the and as Brian said before, how the trash enclosure will be located and what materials we used on that. That will be included along the left property line through a horizontal sided fence. Focusing on some plant material, I know you guys aren't totally focused strictly on native plants and what they're used for, but we will include some native plants that are durable, provide that lush experience while also providing canopy, especially in this more plaza type space. Next week. Just shows a rendered section of that area showing that fire lane. This area didn't change too much, showing circulation from the parking area of the site to the back portion of the multifamily building and how it relates to the low line. Again, showing a little materials palette or a landscape palette. The one photo here is the cord 10 wall or cord 10 screen wall that would act as some green screen, again, screening the parking from the low line. again, focusing on plant material that's more durable, likes the shade, very shade tolerant, and brushless. Yeah, the bottom section or elevation shows those planters being used as more grade fashion with varying heights, and again, the color palette relating back to those. These are just some conceptual renders. They have been more developed since the last time, but the idea stays relatively the same. How we develop more ceramical mountains that are more architecturally pleasing. That could eventually possibly be used as a precedent for different areas of entry points or access points. It's just an overall plan palette. There's one additional slide shows more of the materials from the top. Concrete paver goes through a little more site furnishings, more natural materials relating back to kind of the historical aspect of the rail system, and then focuses on adding some site features such as water fountains, light bollards, and light poles.
Okay, great. Any questions for the applicant from the board? Hearing none, any public comment? Staff comments and recommendations?
Okay. Got it here. Yeah. There we go. That's all previous notes there for received yesterday. And then we had some staff notes we wanted the board to have, which I think you've touched on every one of those. There was one item I would note, which was there's been some conversations and outreach with the adjacent neighbors on HF and I streets regarding impacts of the development. The city continues to work with neighbors and the developer to address concerns related to traffic and parking. Comments number one, the height of the parapets has increased. To mitigate the additional height at the 5-story portion, the design has used a larger profile Kynar aluminum cornice. There was a simplicity on the previous parapets and wall caps that has been lost. For this more contemporary building language, this increased ornamentation seems too much, and we suggest restudy. Two, of note, related to the use of green in the project and how the color might tie into the low line. Green is one of the colors chosen for the Low Country low line identification. However, it is not the green depicted at this time. And for previous board comment, for previous meeting on the project, the accent green will be determined at the mock-up review. The use of the color under the bridges, which will require DOT approval, should be coordinated with the low line so as to comfortably integrate or transition to the low line. And three, the plaza at the east side facing the low line is now a gravel recreation area. The cool and dark tones of the brick and siding on the building and gravel present a cold, perhaps unfriendly aspect to this area. The green tone, which is to be determined at the mock-up review, could be used to warm up the space. Of note, I believe that the renderings have a colder tone than the brick that we're seeing today. This does have a warmer tone. Additionally, VAR suggests revising the backless benches and their locations to be something friendlier and used in locations which won't interrupt the areas, which could be used for programmed events. Consider how benches might be used as a delineator between open space and picnic area. Movable seating is encouraged as it allows for gatherings of different sizes more easily. Then, I wanted to go over some comments that will fall under DRC review, but I would love for the board to have a cursory glance and cursory feedback. But that's kind of what it is, high-level feedback. Number 4, VAR staff have encouraged an edge treatment between the parking lot and the street at 666 King Street. The use of raised planter boxes will provide an edge, protect plantings from being trampled, and provide a porous edge for easy access between them. The materials, color, and size of the planter should be studied. The plant species will need to be carefully selected, and maintenance and upkeep will need to be determined as part of the overall solution. 5, there are examples of painted raised roadway columns in Charleston. The art, height, and location will require DRC review prior to obtaining or approaching the Department of Transportation. In general, however, BAR staff is not opposed to public art on the columns. We do question whether the color should be so closely tied to the new building as if to appear to be a branding element rather than public art. And last, the parking lot at 666 King will be reviewed by the DRC, and this will include design and materials. And we're recommending preliminary approval with board and staff comments.
Any clarification from the applicant? Okay, board discussion.
Jay, thank you for your presentation. There's an opportunity to engage the public in a real meaningful way at both the ground and the corners. And I feel the detailing at the ground exposure when you're near the building, to me, is comfortable. It feels nice. I like the way the brick planes, it's almost like you just have a brick wall that goes from the ground up to the top, and then it's infill behind it. There's a series of those, and I like the way that looks. You also get this powerful experience when you're on the elevated interstate coming into the city. And we don't have many of those points where we have great responsibility to put an appropriate structure there. And I don't have the same feeling about it there. I said this in our previous meeting, and I'll say it again now, but I have a very positive feeling at the ground level coming in on the interstate and viewing what's there. I went on the computer today to look at the Meeting Street corridor and most of the other buildings as you're coming in on the interstate. It all looks about the same. There's some different colors and a little bit deeper recesses or window sizes. But I'm not positive about the way that it looks as you're coming in on the interstate. That's my comment.
Okay. Other board comments?
I think this project is progressing well from get-go, as we have seen it. I would be, I'm in agreement with the cornice and parapet, what staff is noting and recommending. I think the previous design was much more appropriate for this type of building, because it just became the difference is cornice is a little bit more traditional, and rest of the building is sorry. So I'm just in agreement with staff. As far as going back to this gate building, and unless we stop building those overpasses so high, we never will get to the gateway building right, unless it's Empire Station, building. So I feel comfortable with that, and not to be in the disagreement with James, but just that's my own opinion. And I'm really appreciate the celebration of the ground and the involvement, the ground, the landscape, and all kind of things. So humanity will be engaged and very, very good for the residents all around. So thank you.
I think I'm in agreement with everything that Mr. Meadows has shared. For it to be a gateway building, it needs to be something handsome. And I think that it's in context of the immediate surroundings at a preliminary stage. I'm not sure it quite does that. I haven't seen the previous plans of what was changed since the last time, but I'm not sure that this is to work.
Okay, any further board comments or emotion? Oh, no, you just,
I'm not putting you on the floor.
okay, well, since you invited it. I think that James, I think you're correct that a lot of the buildings tend to end up with a similar effect once you are at the elevated height of the roadway. But that may be easily addressed by the treatment of the cornice, which is already a staff comment. And I would interpret y'all's remarks to be that so much attention has been lavished on the ground plane, which is entirely appropriate. Now take a moment to do that same thing at the top, because the top on this building is just visible space. But I do think that can be resolved between preliminary and final. Any further comments or motion?
Preliminary approval with staff and board comments.
For preliminary approval with staff and board comments, do we have a second? Jared can second the motion. Yes, I'll second.
I'm not sure.
I think
Unless it's precedent.
I think we can. Well, we've had the chair make a motion before. Blew everybody's minds, but it happened. With that, I would call that made, properly seconded. So I'll take a vote. And I'll do this individually. Mr. Matters, how do you vote?
James, how do you vote?
Good. Subject, how do you vote?
Yeah.
All right. Mr. Brown?
No.
All right, the motion fails because I would vote yay, so that's a split vote. Yeah, hear another motion.
Sure. Before I make the motion, so please, my lack of support on this tonight specifically related to my comments. So I know this project can move forward with the same attention paid as Jay described to elements that I talked about and others have talked about. And I know that you can do that. And I look forward to supporting this motion. If you bring it back.
All right.
I make a motion to deny the request.
Deny?
Defer the request.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Deferral then with, say,
Board staff.
board staff comments. All right, so we have a new motion made for deferral with board staff comments. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Go down the roll again. Mr. Brown, how do you vote?
Yay in favor.
Subject. Brad, solution. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Nay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I abstain. Motion carries. Next item. 15 Radcliffe Street.
Item number 4 is 15 Radcliffe Street. This one is requesting conceptual approval for the relocation of the residents at 15 Radcliffe Street to 120 St. Philip Street. Context slides. The red outline showing you the location of 15 Radcliffe. And the hand showing you the location of 120 St. Philip, where the proposal would relocate this house to. An image of the house. Mr. Joe Schmidt of Evans and Schmidt.
Mr. Chairman, can I, may I ask a question? staff. Board, you
Yeah,
know,
a preliminary question.
preliminary question. So, and this is just really interesting. Why is this board and not the small board? As this is, 5,000, I don't know how many square feet, Joe, 5,000 square feet, whatever. I'm just interested.
It's very similar to the way 77 Washington was handled in that that parcel that would be opened up would be a large project.
But in that project, we heard the whole project.
We did hear it all in one night,
And
yes.
here we are not.
Yeah.
Here we're looking at something that's less than 10,000 square feet.
Yeah,
And it's specifically not part of another project.
it's true. That's true. I think that's been tradition in how we've looked at it.
Yeah, since I've been around things like this, which are known to see larger projects, no matter what they might be, have been relegated to this board simply because that gives the board, it basically informs the board of what was there when you get to the next stage.
Okay. I guess we'll just proceed with Mr. Schmidt's presentation, right? Unless there are any other follow-up questions to that.
It's difficult for me because yesterday when we had a conversation, Joe, it was relative to this not being part of any other project with this application.
Right, there was discussion about that, and what's pertinent about that, and this is what has been hammered in my little brain by city legal, is that each application has to stand on its own merits without regard to any potential future applications. And that goes for the comments that we have, it goes for the comments that the staff has, really for the public too, because what we're looking at today is just simply the relocation of the structure. What may follow will also fall under the jurisdiction of the board, and we have an opportunity for everybody to have a say on that. So with that, why don't we go ahead and proceed?
Thank you.
Joe Schmidt, Assistant Architect, I'd like to speak from the.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen. Introduce my team, and Joe Schmidt, our architect, Bill McKenzie, who is our construction consultant. If we're allowed to move the building, Bill will be responsible for the new foundation, relocation, and kind of experienced construction individual. Just a bit of history on the property. My family, acquired this, was referred to as the Condon Department Store property in 1997. So we've owned it for 25 years. We were encouraged by the city and the college to do so. The old Condon Department Store was damaged badly by Hugo and never rebuilt. But Mr. Condon, in his 30, 40 years of ownership, basically assembled this parking lot to provide parking for the store. And he basically, we purchased the property in, I said, 1997. The wood frame buildings that were there were so damaged by Hugo that never rebuilt. And so we, with the encouragement of the college and the city, we designed it. Joe was the actual architect for the Warren Place student housing project that's there now. Large brick structures run down Warren Street. Joe will speak to the site itself and what was there prior to. But this house was one of the 3 out parcels on the site that basically been living isolated in the middle of this asphalt parking lot. We have reached out to the neighborhood. We've talked with the immediate neighbors all around. We've met with the Historic Charleston Foundation, Preservation Society, the Redwood Borough Neighborhood Association. Got together to tell them what the plans were and are. I'll tell you honestly, we've been very candid and back and forth with your staff. We talked about should being large or should it be small? And we were comfortable either way, because we made no bones about it. If they're able to move the house, and we would anticipate coming back to you with a schedule for a larger project on the site. But we would not build that larger project if we can't move the house. So, and spend several $100,000 to design something that might not be feasible didn't make sense. So the thought process was come deal with the relocation of the building, and then we'd be back to you at a later point with overall design. The City of Charleston Housing Authority owns two buildings, two apartment buildings right across the street on St. Phillips. And we've been in contact with Art Milligan and Don Cameron from before. They're very much in support of the relocation of the house. They feel it will strengthen that whole section of St. Phillips Street, more of a single family neighborhood. They feel very positive about it and encourage us to do it. We have also reached out to the family to build the house because it's a good house. It has some historic, it's a Queen Anne design, and we want to save the house. That's why I acquired it. We propose the best way to save this house is to move it around to a single family neighborhood on St. Philip Street, where it will nestle up in a row and across from other single family residential. That seems to be the best solution to saving this piece of property. We've had general concurrence with everybody we talked to about that. Since it's a historic property, I went back to the Benton family. This house was built around 1910, sometime between 1902 and 1910, by a gentleman, Dr. Bennett, who was an African-American minister in the community, a prominent family, lived here with his family. He died shortly after building the house. Family has subsequently moved away. I talked to his granddaughter today in Washington, and she very encouraged that the house was going to be moved and saved and restored. And so I shared our plans with her, actually sent her a copy of his application so she could understand it fully. And her response to me by email this afternoon was, "You made my day." She said, "I've always wanted to save this house. It was our family property. My grandfather built it." And he said, "Well, knowing you're interested in the history, I'll tell you what we'll commit to without reservation is to put a plaque on St. Philip Street in front of this house that basically explains the history and your family and how they were all involved in it. And it's a house worth saving. This is a good house. It ought to be a part of a single family neighborhood, not sitting in the asphalt parking lot. Seems to be, so many people we've talked to, this is a good solution. So we welcome your input. And Joe Smith, our architect, to the architecture and the location.
If you like to flip through the, that's a good stop there. Go back one. If you're looking at the side and the front, the four key elevations: the front, the side, facing the parking lot, zero lot line on the side that you're looking at, the next side. Virtually no backyard for this poor house. I don't know how Mr. Condon was able to trim this lot down to virtually a house, but there's also on the bottom slide a wood fence separating it, but you're not able to get a car in there, get out of the car. So a pretty dysfunctional site for this house to be on. It is a remarkable house. It is a Queen Anne. And it's for all of the time and situation around it, it's holding its own. I was surprised when I picked up some of the shakes off the ground. It's only got 2 coats of paint on it. They're both yellow. They've never changed. It's really frozen in time. The problem is the neighborhood around it did not freeze in time. There were 12 houses in the strip on Radcliffe Street, and it's the last one. And there were 18 properties, buildings, houses that Mr. Condon tore down to create that parking lot and his apartment store. And out of that, this and 2 houses on St. Phillips are all that's left. my feeling is, and we all know we're talking about a larger project, a developable site, but this took precedent when I walked by one day and found them for sale sign out there, and Frank was unaware of that. It was never available for sale, for consideration. And I said, you need to save this house. That's the most important thing. This needs to be a separate application because Frank, on my word, bought the property with the idea that he could save this house. But there's nobody in this room who could think that once you put the money into this house and put it back on the market, it's going to become a single family house. It's just not going to happen in this situation surrounded by all this asphalt. So he brought it to me and said, well, if I will look into that, but you have to give it a logical location. 128 St. Phillips is a very logical location. It moves the house 129 feet on the same property, in the same neighborhood, in the same context of being a mid-block house. And actually another perk for this is an X-zone site, which means we can move the house without having to raise the house like would be happening in a normal situation. We can keep the exact same context. The house where we situated it, if you want to run through the slides. This is just more context of the neighborhood. The house would situate right where you see that gray car in the top picture, nestled in between Warren Place and 122 St. Phillips. 122 and 124 are the only other residential buildings on this entire block that had not been demolished for years.
Just might interject, Joe, at that point, we also have acquired those two houses. So we basically, the area we're going to try to impact as little as we can. We work with those residents who are in those houses now, just on a regular basis, to try to do whatever we do with the project. But it seemed better to move this 15 Radcliffe Street, put in a row of other houses, and that made the most sense for context.
Correct. There's no plan to move those other two houses. This obviously is, we believe, the right solution would be for this house to be relocated. Those houses aren't in jeopardy of not being used as residential. They're on a residential street. This is on a commercial street, and it has been in jeopardy for many years. It's been unoccupied, and has been required. These are the houses across the street. There were 7 houses across the street. There were only 2 left that are original. And then, if you go to the next one, the housing authority came in and inserted a house on either side of the house you see in the top picture on the left. That's the only original house on this block. Like I said, it's a beautiful home. It just has no functional purpose as a residence in Radcliffe Borough for a single family in its present location. And I don't see any way around that. And we're looking here for an opportunity to actually let it contribute to the neighborhood. It was used by the family for a few years. Then they started renting out rooms as an apartment building. It's been a duplex ever since. It's been abandoned for at least 8 years or so. Totally, they went on for a while. The other 2 houses on St. Philip, this would join, are also duplexes. I said multiple tenant student housing. With Frank having purchased them, the idea is we have a couple ways to help those houses out and also help them contribute to the neighborhood as single family residences when we're done with it. I'll get into that. Top shows the before, the bottom shows it inserted. It is appropriate in height and scale. It will be being placed on a general business site. We're going to have to go to the effort of turning it into, it's presently on a DR2 site. When we move it, we will have it converted, this piece of property created and converted into a DR1 site. But as you can see, the height of the building scales up nicely between 22 and Warren Place. And this is the opposite view as it tiers down. This building will displace 7 parking places in the strip that come all the way out to the street. So the house blocks that current parking lot of 120 cars and fills that space in nicely.
You might speak to the current zoning Warren Place on the existing parking asphalt lot.
Right. There's 120, like I said, there's 120 parking spaces there. All those spaces are dedicated to Warren Place. So we're, even by doing this, except that we could probably displace those 7 places in where 15 Warren goes, we have no choice but to keep the surface parking lot around it. But we'll be able to insert this by transferring those 2 opportunities. Again, you can see the tiering up, which is rather handsome in its mid-block scenario. You just click to the last one. Well, I'm sorry, if people don't know where it is, you might have to go back because we haven't talked about it in a while. You can see where it was targeted on mid-block, right? I think it goes back 1 slide. Working up there, that's where it was, and then flip to the last slide. Very last. There you go. So this would be the site that we'd be creating as a new DR1 site. There's actually ample space there. We don't have to affect any trees that are of interest to the city. It nestles up nicely in Warren Place. It leaves a small alleyway for fire department and students. But at the same time, we have the opportunity, and that was the major benefit for Frank having purchased 122 and 124. 1, it was a courtesy if there was any future construction. 2, it allows us to take the property line and eradicate it for 122 and shift it over until they have a respectable driveway width. Because right now, that driveway is barely functional for 1 small car. You try to pull in a second car, neither car can get out. The property tapers. So the approach will be to move that property over and create more space for 1, 2, 3 for that. Again, to recap, my purpose for being here today is I do believe this is in the best interest of the house. I've been in business for 38 years, saving buildings and restoring them, and this is only the 2nd time I've ever participated in an application to actually have one moved. First application had not been done. Those buildings were slated for demolition, so we moved them.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Any public comment?
I'm sorry, I have one question. Do y'all have the letters of support from the family?
Excuse me.
Do you have the letters of support from the family that you can present to the
It
board?
is my family, Frank Lumley, managing venture
No,
partner.
No, the family that owned, the family that owned the
That
building.
was just a conversation this morning. It took that long to get the tracker down. And yet, she was very much.
She wants to come to see the relocation of the house. She's very excited about it. And so I'm confident, yes, I can get a letter of support for her. Have a 30-minute conversation this morning. And as I said, after it's over, I got an email back and said you made my day. So family will think it's wonderful. Relocate, save the house, particularly the fact that she'll put a sign out giving our name.
Mr. Brumley, does this individual live in Charleston?
You know, she lives in Washington. There are no family members that are originally locally. She's an attorney who lives in Washington. And grandfather was a graduate of Fisk, and he was a minister at Mandalay and very, very nice, responsible people doing their house.
Any further questions of the applicant? Public comment. We didn't receive any written public comment on this. Okay, so in-person public comment. They're gonna need that podium.
Good afternoon, James Doyle. I'm representing the Red Cliff Borough Neighborhood Association. It's a great house. We like to see it restored. But we believe that its present location fits the character of the neighborhood.
Thank you. Additional public comment?
How you doing? I'm David Skinner. I live at 18 Radcliffe Street, which is on the corner of Radcliffe and St. Phillips. This house is diagonally across from my house right now, about probably 70 feet down, maybe 100 feet down, in the middle of the neighborhood. What I find amazing is that we're going to rip the fabric of an African-American history house out of our neighborhood and move it to a new location. You know, we should be building monuments for this instead of tearing it down like we did the Calvin statue. But that being said, with the revenue, it's my understanding you can't move a piece of property off of its existing land. You can move it on the property. But this is on 15 Radcliffe Street. So there's no property to move it on if that is the case. And I could be wrong with that. I'm not familiar with all of the rules and regulations here as to what, but it would be a real shame. This house should be restored. But I also find it amazing that nobody's reached out to any of the Black community or any of the historical Black community to get their opinion on moving this house, because it is their history, not ours. And you know, in that neighborhood, Radcliffe and King Street, so much has been taken away from them. For us to move this house now without anybody representing them is a shame. Thank you.
And again, with the Preservation Society of Charleston, we would like to thank the applicant for reaching out and meeting with us about this proposal. This building has long languished, and we are glad to see interest in its rehabilitation. Though deteriorated, the building retains its exceptional Queen Anne Victorian character, and due to its highly conspicuous state, many have been concerned for its well-being. From conversations with residents, we know the community values the preservation of this building, especially since so much around it has been lost. The building is also culturally significant to Charleston's African American history, having been built by Reverend Henry W.B. Bennett, a Black religious leader in Charleston's African Methodist Episcopal churches, and later serving as rental space available to Black citizens in Charleston. Once part of a thriving, diverse neighborhood home to African American and immigrant communities in the 19th and early 20th centuries, this house stands as the last vestige of that era on this stretch of block. The guidelines for applying the Secretary of the Interior standards strongly recommends against relocating historic buildings when it can be avoided due to potentially, quote, destroying historic relationships between buildings and landscapes, diminishing the historic character of a property by radically changing buildings and site features, and creating a false historical appearance. We are concerned about the proposal to relocate this building to St. Philip Street, which would diminish its integrity by altering its orientation and context, including its relationship with surrounding buildings, like St. Patrick's Church across the street, which was standing at the time the house was constructed, as well as create a false sense of history, especially considering the receiving site at 120 St. Philip was once occupied by an older single house that appears to have been a sister house to the exit building at 122 St. Philip Street on the Sanborn maps. It's also important to consider that relocation would likely prevent its eligibility for historic designation, such as contributing to a National Register Historic District if one were created here in the future. We recognize that this site is ripe for redevelopment, but we do not see a compelling reason to relocate the structure to accommodate future plans. Instead, this is an opportunity to introduce creative, compatible infill that relates to and capitalizes on the scale and character of this building. To reiterate, we are highly supportive of efforts to rehabilitate this historic structure. But given its cultural and architectural significance, as well as high degree of existing integrity that would be compromised if it were moved to the proposed St. Philip's Street site, we feel the relocation of 15 Radcliffe should be denied as submitted. Instead, we urge the applicant to study options for integrating the building into the site's redevelopment, or more minimally relocating it to better retain its orientation in relationship to the context. Thank you.
Mr. Paper, could you go back to the very first overhead that shows the neighborhood? On Miss Phillip Roads, I look at 28 Warren Street, and one of these pictures, let's go, there, nope, there, that's my bedroom window. So I live right on the corner in that tan house, and I'm just here to ask you to either defer or delay this vote, because this vote is the pebble in a pond. We all know it, right? You were at the site, we can see the site. There seems to be some confusion among the board itself about whether this is the appropriate venue for this approval. There seems to be some confusion here about exactly what the precedent is with relocation, if I understood you correctly.
That, yeah. I'll address that.
Okay, thank you. But since there is so much uncertainty, I would really ask that you not take a decisive vote on this tonight. You defer. We all have the opportunity together to learn what the context is, and we have a clear understanding of what this decision would mean next. Because when you take something away, it creates a vacuum. What's going into the vacuum? Do we know? We all know, right? Do we know? I don't think we can talk about it, but we all know. So let's look at this whole project, the whole thing, not just one small little aspect of it that will be the pebble that creates the landslide or something else. Thank you for your time.
Any further public comment? Okay, we'll move on to city staff comments and recommendations.
Sure. I just kind of want to touch on what this gentleman asked and what James has asked, because relocation is definitely not something that we frequently see. In fact, it's not a word that you find all throughout our ordinance. You have to really look for it. And so, you know, with what Lawrence stated, why it came to BARS, there's an article in here that defines, you know, there's two boards of architecture. Generally, they look at BARS 2,000 square feet. Smaller, BAR large, anything that exceeds 10,000 square feet. And then there's a statement at the end that says demolition applications shall be assigned to either the BARS or BARL as determined by staff. I think that the intention of that was demolitions, which would possibly be rolled into a larger project, but because we see so few relocations, my understanding is that would have been included. I mean, we advertise relocations in the same way that we do demolitions in the paper. So we've treated that application in the same way we would have if it were demolition. So I hope that gives you some clarity. All right.
Will there be an opportunity to?
Sir, I'm sorry, but there's really not any opportunity for dialogue. Please continue.
All right, we've got staff comments. Number one, the lot on which the structure sits is 30 by 54, which is primarily the footprint of the structure. Number two, while the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties does not recommend relocation of historic structures because this can destroy the relationship that existed with the landscape, we find the existing context, the surface parking lot to the property lots on three sides, to be considerably altered from the original context, and that the proposed relocation will provide the structure a residential building context like it once had. 3, relocation would maintain appropriate orientation for the front and rear porch. 4, relocation may offer a quicker opportunity for repairs and restoration to the structure. And 5, while it is a concern that once relocated, one might imagine that the residents always existed in this new location, staff finds that the benefits of doing so at this time outweigh this potential negative. Historians will be able to easily discern the relocation. We're recommending approval. One other note, the application did state conceptual approval. I don't think that this would need 3 layers of review. So I think that could be a final approval if approved. And there's understandably a lot of layers to that.
That's stated, applicant response or clarification.
I think the point that I'd like to make again, after 38 years of into work with properties and breathe new life into the properties and so forth, there's all amounts of money that are going to be thrown at this building to restore it, and it's not going to have an end use of single-family residence, which is everybody in this room's desire. We could surround it. We could do what you've seen with other properties and try to patch around it, but it's just not going to come off the same. It's not going to contribute to the neighborhood like it would if it was moved, if it's in the family residences. I think that is the most important thing, to the point where I talked with my client and I said, you know that I asked you to buy this house. I asked you, you told me to find out where to move it. And I found the place, and we're going to go present. And you may not have anything more than another piece of asphalt to patch in that 30 by 50 piece of property. Do you understand that? And he said, but it saves the house. And that is what my goal is, and that is the reason we're here tonight.
Thank you. Board discussions?
So I'll start. I don't always get this opportunity to thank someone for helping me with my whole career, but I thank you front runner, because early on you gave me some opportunities that helped me. And I know that anything that you do that I know of is always great. You do the right thing all the time, so I appreciate that. In this situation, I believe that the way that it's being presented to us, it ties my hands. The concept of that house being located next to those other two, I understand that. And I think that is a way to save that structure. And I think that it is a workable idea. But this application is just to move the house. And this is what I tried to talk with you about yesterday. That doesn't work in my mind. I don't think that's the way it can be done. But I feel very confident there is a way it can be done. And I'm sure that you can figure that out. And but right now, this application that's on the plate today is that we're simply going to move a house to move a house. And you know, I don't understand that. Okay, that's all I gotta say.
Other board discussion?
As a point of clarification, when a board meets 3 people or more, and especially the viewing, that's also considered a public meeting and part of the public record.
Right, that's correct.
I was not comfortable yesterday with being offered the ultimatum of if the house is moved, we're going to restore it. If the house stays, we're not going to restore it. And I believe that Ms. Minigan really relayed a lot of what my concerns were yesterday when I'm evaluating whether or not the home should be moved. Mr. Doyle and Mr. Skinner also provided some good context of what the neighbors in the neighborhood believe. And as I shared at my first meeting, I think that the decisions are made by those who show up. I think that we have to look through it the lens of what the ordinance asks us to do. But as Mr. Meadows said, to move this house for the sake of moving it, I don't think it's appropriate.
Comment?
In my view, relocating this house and creating within the existing fabric of the street and giving the context to this house with other residential properties on the side and across is, gives this house purpose. And we know that even this house will be restored, and like Joe said, there's no land to it whatsoever, how it will be a single family house. And we also know probably that none of these 12 houses which were on that street will be rebuilt ever. So to create the context again. So I agree with staff comments, and in my mind, I will support the relocation.
I'll chime in here. So I've become really familiar with this little portion of the Secretary of Interior Standards, which that's our guide for this. And while generally speaking, relocations of structures are discouraged, they're not forbidden. And there are cases like this one where decisions made by people who are now long gone from us have left this house on an extremely compromised site. And to consolidate the historic structures on the block over to St. Philip does provide an opportunity to give the house an improved context, because its historic context has been paved from wall to wall. The historic context for this building, aside from its relationship to the structures across the street, is gone. And so there is precedent for that even in Charleston. One of them is right behind our backs. The assemblage buildings at Zero George, half those buildings were relocated to that site. We're dealing with a relocation over on Washington Street right now. So there were a couple others that I was thinking of. 40 Line Street actually involved relocation of multiple historic structures to consolidate them in a coherent location at the corner of Line and Meeting. And it did make space for the building that we just looked at the mock-up earlier. So it's not, there's no shibboleth against it. And I think that while it may read as a threat, like, well, if we move it, we'll restore it. But if we can't move it, then we're not. Well, that could be read as a threat, but it could also be read as just a simple reality, because why would you invest in that house in its present location? There's nothing left for it. It's been so drastically compromised. I think the best route in the highest thinking when it comes to preservation, so you have to look at what the greater good actually is for this block and for this property. The greater good is actually to relocate the structure. It will remain its orientation to the street, which is a significant part of the relocation strategy, and it puts it in context with other buildings of its size and type. So I would support the relocation.
I think where it's going to be relocated, there's a void there between, the structures there and the College of Charleston structure. So it fills out that void really nicely and appropriately. So again,
Okay, well, all that said.
So I want to make sure that, Joe, what I said was clear. And it is that I just think there's some missing information. It's not about a future development. It's not about anything else that might go on. It's about more clear details of exactly what's going to happen, how it's going to happen. A real plan for the house. Just bringing clarity to it.
Is it like a preservation plan for the structure rather than just simply relocation?
Yeah, so I mean, just fact finding, right? Because there's no question that, in my mind, if I owned that house, I wouldn't spend the same amount of money on it if it were there than if it were in that other location. But money for us on this board is not. It's not an issue. But what are issues of knowledge? So this is the condition of this house. This is the portion of the house that can be successfully moved. This is the exact placement on the house. This is how we're gonna improve parking for the adjacent owners. So it benefits more than just that one structure. There's a lot of good qualified information that we've talked about, but I think fact finding for me is knowledge, and it helps me with clarity and help me with change.
James, I'm sorry, but it's been presented in all that.
I know it doesn't.
I think you're talking about like, okay, you're gonna fix up the house. How?
Yeah.
How what?
Like
How you gonna do it?
to show documentation of what the resulting
And it's a real
restored
structure.
house
So
would
that's
look
right. That's right.
like.
So
Okay.
it has nothing to do with any other project.
Any-
So those are additional facts for me to make me feel more comfortable and whole.
any further? Yes, sir.
Mike, if this is not gonna sound right, but we were the architects for moving Zero George, those two houses. In fact, if you're any confidence in the fact that once this is moved, we will restore it and make it look like it wants to be there and contributes to it. Was the other project where we moved houses. Had we not moved, we would not,
We're,
we would
we're,
not be there.
we're not in disagreement.
I understand.
All right. Any further board discussion or a motion?
I'm not clear. So, James, are you looking for actual drawings?
I'm looking
Okay.
for facts
Restoration?
about that existing house, right? And the abilities to successfully move that house. What portion of it can actually be moved? Research. And then when it gets moved, how is it going to be put back together? Because this is an important artifact. It's like any other artifact. How are you going to take care of it?
Yeah, I think
I mean,
there's,
do you remember the conversations we had about other buildings that we were going to move recently? And we went back and got it. Let's have a study of the house done. Let's look at the history. And I think that's essential. I mean, you can't do it without doing that.
I think there's an opportunity for that in working with someone at city staff. I saw it in here earlier. It was more towards demolitions, but to determine the feasibility of being able to move something, I think would be really appropriate. If that's what you're getting.
Yeah, sure.
Sounds like y'all are sort of grabbing towards a deferral here. I would just say that the feasibility of relocating the structure, I mean, that's easy to answer for professionals that have been into this before. You can move anything. And moving something an inch is just about the same as moving it 129 feet. So I think the technical feasibility of relocating the structure is the thing, but it sounds like what you're getting at is you know, okay, you move it, then what? Like, what's that new foundation look like? What sort of exterior changes might be made? Things like that. And I appreciate that direction of conversation because I really don't think it's appropriate for us to get tangled up in what might come next because frankly, something's coming.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not what I'm talking
And
about.
there was a proposal made several years ago for another development of that parking lot. And that development was left in a compromised state because it was working around the placement of the sort of structures that were there. We've seen the evidence of that. 82 Mary probably being the most absurd example I can think of. So anyway,
I'm curious though, and going along with that, what about the property at Cumberland that we looked at several meetings ago?
there.
Yeah, I mean that's an example of architecture surrounding a historic structure.
It is, but it's a completely different context because the Marching building, you know, it would be difficult to argue to move that building because of its axial relationship with Philadelphia Alley. And frankly, its position on that rectangular lot doesn't really affect. You know, if you're just filling in the white space on this block, then you're going to end up with a really irregular building. That's what was proposed previously. It was not successful.
If it was a single building.
But that said, I mean, that's all conjecture. So any further discussion or motion on this one?
Sure, and I'd also like to ask if, Mr. Chairman, if I will make a motion for deferral,
Okay.
but I would also like to ask if you would rather just withdraw tonight.
I'm really not seeing the reason for deferral.
That's not what I was. That's not, never mind. I'll make a motion for deferral.
Okay.
The project with board and staff comments.
Probably for this one, just to ensure clarity, we probably ought to give them some. Your line of discussion was that deferral was appropriate for the sake of additional information. Probably ought to spell that out.
But so read it back to me. I mean, if you get that in some of the notes, that's where I thought that
Alice
was coming
handwriting
in.
tonight.
That's what I was
Basically-
coming in with the board and staff comments.
And what I think the general push there is for what I would also would call a preservation plan. I think, am I correct, that what you're looking for is what's the foundation look like? How are you taking care of the materials? That sort of thing.
A preservation plan would be good.
So we might style that as
A motion for deferral, additional study, and creation of a preservation plan towards moving the structure. Preservation and feasibility plan for moving the structure.
notes are degrading quickly, so I'm going to reread this. So this is a motion for deferral for additional study and creation of a preservation and feasibility plan towards moving the structure.
And other board and staff comments.
And board and staff comments. All right. Read that one more time just for clarity of record. Deferral for additional study and creation of a preservation and feasibility plan towards moving the structure with board and staff comments. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Now roll. Mr. Metters, how do you vote?
Yea in favor.
Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote?
Nay.
Mr. Metters, how do you vote? Or, I'm sorry, Mr. Seaton, how do you vote?
Yea in favor, please.
And I will abstain here. So we have 2-1, the motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Schmidt, somebody leaving an iPad.
I do a little bit in between, but I do a lot of college trash. Plants and bottles, it's fun.
Thank you for giving us an audience.
At least we have one.
Audience of one. Okay, we're moving on to agenda item number 7, which is the revised BAR sign policy statement. This is the general sign policy statement, and the edits that have been incorporated are also, many of these are what has come from the lengthy discussion about a policy statement that would incorporate Drive and some of those newer buildings in that evolving area. And so the second piece will be a sign policy statement on the historic corridor. So, have you all had a chance to look it over?
Yes.
And was procedurally, but do you have any questions for the staff?
I do not.
I wish there were a little more teeth in this to make your job
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah.
As I understand it from legal, that could make things somewhat more difficult down the road. So
Right.
those are my comments. Thank you for the modifications that were made.
And that's it. Any other comments, or we'll need a motion to adopt this? Approve, I would say, by resolution. So,
I'll move to approve this as submitted.
Was there an opportunity for public comment?
Yes, there is, actually.
Sorry.
I actually, is,
There is a comment anyway, so there's that.
you have no comments.
Sorry.
All right, sorry, I hate to, I want to disenfranchise anyone. All right, so we do have a motion for approval as submitted. Mr. Betters, do we have a second? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Here's 4-0.
And you're adopting both, you're looking at them separately, right?
Yeah, I think we are looking at the historic corridor separate from
Perfect.
the.
So I'll give you just a couple of items here of note, the difference between the two. You'll notice on the historic corridor district statement, number 6 is not on the previous document, on the it's not on the general zone policy statement. It does apply to illumination. Also, point 4 has some additional information.
Isn't 6 the only modification?
I believe so. Did y'all edit point 4 or was it you just added?
Point 4, one of the things that we edited, and I was the old policy talked about this historic material, so we said that some material should be compatible with the building, whether it's historic or not. And then the rest of that, mostly in the last version.
Okay.
Or possibly the last statement.
Okay, well, with that, maybe I'll take an opportunity for any public comment. Question? I'll take a motion also.
Motion to adopt the signed policy statement regarding the historic corridor district.
Okay. Approve as submitted. Mr. Brown, do I have seconds? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And I guess since I'm acting chair, I should sign this, right?
Yes, please. That would be great.
Green pen, okay? Right. Every time I see a sign, I'm twitching.
We'll use this podium, Word. Okay. Agenda item number 9 is a presentation by staff on the status of ordinance amendments and policy proposals that will affect the work that you have as board members. So starting with the first, we're talking about a policy statement for the historic materials demolition purview. This is the area north of Line Street, south of Mount Pleasant, but not including the historic corridor. And worked on this policy for longer than you want to know, trying to find the balance that would bring clarity in the process, clarity on any appropriate replacement materials for property owners. There's no one that wants to encourage replacement over restoration and preservation, but we realize that work is being done under the cover of night. We realize that preservation and restoration can sometimes be more costly, and there's a lot of pressure to provide balance, keep people in their homes, keep structures preserved by allowing some more, modern materials and what may be cost-friendly materials. So that's been the effort behind this, and I've got some bullet points in your notes that I'll read to you just to kind of give you what the policy will and will not do, and then we'll bring the policy to you at the next board meeting. So we're not going to have to get into the nitty-gritty tonight, but I want to give you a preview of what it will do, and then we can dive in next time. Policy applies to historic material visible from the public right of way on buildings 50 years or older. It will utilize the Upper Peninsula Historic Architectural Survey data and those building ratings which have been previously adopted by the city. It will define character-defining features and encourage repair and restoration rather than demolition and replacement for Secretary of Interior standards. Without being proprietary, but more generic, it will list replacement materials related to windows, roofing, shutters, siding, and columns, which in lieu of repair or restoration would be suitable and treated as an in-kind replacement. So for example, depending on the building's category, because the policy statement is divided into like a group 1 and group 2. Appropriate windows in one group, appropriate window replacements in one group will include simulated divided light windows, as opposed to a true divided light. That's one example, okay? This policy will give clarity to staff and board to make a knowledgeable and informed decision and allow more applications to be handled by staff rather than the board. So for example, this will give staff who are working the permit center the ability to have someone come in, you know, this is my objective here, I'm gonna have to replace this for whatever reasons, but this is what I'm replacing it with. If it's an appropriate in-kind replacement, within that framework of what we've outlined in the policy, it could be done by the staff member in the permit center. At this point in time, anything that is considered for replacement often goes to the VARS because they're only looking at it in the light of what's being removed as demolition, and it's really tough because you don't know what's coming. And so this gives us some flexibilities for staff to handle a lot of those things that would go to the board. As I said, the policy breaks buildings into group 1 and group 2. Group 1 would have more restrictions on it as opposed to group 2. Group 1 buildings include buildings rated 1 or 2 and that are more significant, such as on the National Register. Group 2 provides additional flexibilities for those buildings rated 3 or 4 or unsurveyed. Provides information to homeowners regarding standards, options, and an approved review process. Again, that leads to clarity and availability of information. And it includes accommodations for legacy owners, heirs property, and affordability while maintaining the historical and cultural significance of the city's neighborhoods.
What does that mean?
It seeks to find balance on, this has been a really tough one.
I'm sure it has.
You know it has. I've had a lot of come to Jesus moments with this one.
Yeah.
And we are continually pressured to find ways to accommodate people's needs, and it's really hard when your entire inner wiring is about buildings, and we've had to really talk about and look at the people aspect of things. And we look at our job as we protect the culture of people through buildings. We've gotten political pressure from that rise up through constituents of different areas of the city. And there is a big picture here in that, number one, there is a process that's hard for people, that's challenging for people, and some of this work will allow more clarity for people to understand, hey, number one, you're under BAR. Number two, we're a resource and we're trying to help you. There's a reputation that we're like, no, that's not the case. But but there's that aspect of it. There's also the larger picture, which I've had to get to myself. A couple of things I would share in that I've had to really think about, if I'm on the sidewalk and I'm on the public right of way, what pieces and parts of the building am I comfortable with providing a modern day replacement with? And I think I've gotten there, and we'll dive into that in a couple of weeks. And then there's the third element that I would say that one of the things we look at a lot is roof replacement. And you're right, we're not going to look at costs. We're not going to look at that. We will look at the condition of the roof, but in that we're not really looking at what comes after it, because we don't have the authority to do that right now. We find ourselves in this cycle of there's a real hesitancy to approve the demolition of a roof when you can't see what comes next. And there's certain extreme cases where that leaky roof or that unrepaired roof could lead to damage on other historic fabric. And so I've had to back up and look at it real holistically, because it has been hard.
I get that one.
Yeah.
So the plan is that, so y'all are gonna make basically a version of this presentation at community development next week?
That's correct.
Okay.
So we're gonna take bullet points similar to this, high level, not detail oriented too much. We're taking it to CD committee next week. Because a lot of our, all policy will go through CD committee, community development committee arm of city council. So they'll take a look at it, and then it will come to you all for, you know, the deep dive review. Whatever.
Who's your team working on this?
This has actually been me, Frankie, Isabella. They're both very preservation minded. Mandy, and advocacy groups kind of take a look at it and give us feedback and kind of, you know, take a lot of different voices into play and see what we could all get to here.
Well, I think, so, you know, we spent a year and a half looking at the BAR ordinance from top to bottom, 19, it might as well have been, 2015 to 2017. And where this is really from, this may be a helpful background for you, Steve, because I don't know if you were clued into all this at this level of detail, but before 2017, the BAR did have jurisdiction over demolitions of buildings 50 years old and older between Line Street and Pleasant Street. But that definition of demolition was imprecise, to say the least, and it was sort of interpreted to be like, well, as long as you don't tear down more than half of it. And then we started seeing houses in Wagner Terrace that were literally sawn down the ridge, and half of it was gone and half of it remained. And so in the 17 alterations, there were several provisions in there to where removal of any historic, any character defining historic fabric building, namely roofing, siding, windows, removing those constituted partial demolition. And it's that sort of, those provisions in the ordinance probably sat unmolested for a year or more, but suddenly it's become very hot and increasingly politicized issue. So I support what y'all are trying to do. I think threading the needle, especially on the means testing, I don't know how in the hell that's going to, but I get it. You're trying to help people that, you know, preservation is from time to time accused of being a vehicle of gentrification, and it has been. Look at the east side, but I can find a way to forestall that, right? And giving applicants an opportunity to say, well, if your true divided light single hung wood windows are completely shot, then here are 3 alternatives to that. You pull them out, but you need to do this, that, or the other. And I think that's totally reasonable. There are plenty of municipalities in the country that have those sort of if-then formulations in the ordinance.
So, as I read this earlier, these words like encourage, lists. And so when you have lists, it's not going to be a complete list. So how are you going to handle things that come in that aren't on the list? And you got that pretty well covered. I mean, at least I think. And then, you know, what's interesting to me is, but removing the option for additional height based on architectural. You know,
We're getting to that next.
Oh,
Hold
sorry.
on.
Sorry.
We're not there yet.
My bad.
I will share about the means testing. To where we're at right now. So we really felt open hard about that. We've talked to legal, and where we have landed is we're looking at buildings and homes that have been owned and recorded as a primary residence or heirs property by the same family or a member thereof for 25 years or longer, or owners with a household income that does not exceed 80% of the area median income as defined by the city's Department of Housing and Community Development. Except for that category of those two, except for any properties individually on the National Register or contributing to a district, would be in the lower category for more flexibility. That's the means testing piece.
Yep.
And yes, logistically, we'll have to figure that one out, but that's been tested by legal.
So really, so like, Jay lives here, I'm his neighbor, and I get to do something that he can't do because my family's owned this house a long time. Yeah, that's.
Or you get to do it and then immediately flip it to somebody that looks like me.
You know, one piece of this, you know, the piece that's related to the architectural ratings, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. We've heard that is challenging for people to find, and it is. I mean, the 2004 survey of the Upper Peninsula is not even an easy book to comb through. It's cumbersome. So that is part of, if we're doing this push, making the information available for that too it's going to be a big deal.
It might be an opportune time to redo it, to do the inventory over again.
It is.
You're doing that internally.
Kind of, we got ideas.
That's a practical question here. People are purchasing the properties. How do they know at the time what they are against?
I mean, that's a great question. I think I'm probably.
Do we educate realtors and brokers and things like that?
No,
Because
I
then
think
we're
it's-
dealing with a, heartbreaking situation.
I think it's your due diligence as a property purchaser to do all that. And I don't know. We hear things from both sides, and sometimes you're immediately skeptical of some of the things you hear, and sometimes I understand. I mean, no one selling a property is going to add a challenge to cumber up that property to make it less appealing to someone.
So
Sometimes that's
it's such a great clue to what you're saying is right on target, because probably 2 or 3 times a week we get a call, say, come look at this property with us, we're thinking about buying it. I go, okay, here's our list of things that you need to know about this house at this address in this neighborhood, flooding, zoning. You probably can't change your roof
I
out.
have the
You can't
same.
change. So
I have the
people are
same
going,
experience.
what? You're kidding me? And I'm going, no. So that's, you need to.
But there's plenty of people who, and realtors specifically lead them, you know? And then people get stuck. And I don't know, maybe it is our obligation, city obligation, to make sure that brokers and realtors do not mislead you.
Well, one thing I would say is that, to me, there seems to be an opportunity for outreach to existing neighborhoods. And it wouldn't solve that so much, but there's maybe a vacuum between what we do, what our purview is, what our purview is not, and the larger community. I mean, I think there is an opportunity for a large amount of
I didn't
outreach.
say the city.
Yeah. But outreach related to, number 1, you're under BAR purview. Here's number 2, why that's a great thing for you. Here's, why we can be a resource, and so on and so forth as an example. I don't think that would solve that unless it formed its way into the realtor world and that kind of thing. But I do think that some outreach would be better than, I think it's time. I think that's needed. We all have seen that.
So has anybody on the CD committee taken a look at this yet?
Not this version.
They know you're, I mean, are you on the agenda for this document? I mean, it's not a
So Robert's
surprise.
gonna present it next week.
Chicken.
Thank you, Pete. I would go back. I'm not serious.
I mean, I think this is, I think that this is probably a necessary step for the present moment, but it also has an opportunity to really be beneficial, So I can't wait to see it.
Okay. Well, this is a public meeting. So.
Oh yeah, we've just sort of trampled all over the process. Any public comment?
Quick question on profile. I had kind of done it together for both of these. I could break them up.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I could do it all.
Or I can go on. Do you want to hear from the public related to specifically this policy?
Let's go ahead. Well, I mean, they're different,
Go
but
ahead.
it's all, yeah, let's just break it up.
Okay, where you at?
Just make it.
Great, I appreciate you letting me speak tonight. Erin Madigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. Over the past several months, the Preservation Society has engaged with city staff, preservation colleagues, and the design community on changes to VAR policies that we are pleased to see now move forward for review and adoption. So first, we believe policy change objectives proposed for north of Line Street will substantially benefit homeowners, design professionals, and city policymakers alike in the regulatory process. As this policy is further refined, we strongly encourage the celebration of this area's unique history, culture, and architecture to be at the forefront of the conversation. Other goals we are supportive of advancing through the policy include, first, allowing the majority of homeowners north of Line greater flexibility for replacement features with compatible substitute materials, while also establishing strong protections for the most significant buildings in the area. Streamlining approvals by allowing for staff level review to determine whether proposals meet standards for in-kind and compatible replacements. Providing clarity and transparency to a process that, as of now, can be challenging for staff and applicants. The VAR should continue enhancing its communication to understand and respond to community values and preservation, and provide clear guidance on regulations and permitting. And where possible, create preservation policies that remove barriers for low-income and long-term residents to maintain and improve their properties. If done properly, this is just one thing the city can do to forestall population shifts by longtime residents away from the city's traditionally diverse urban core. And I know that addressed a lot of the discussion that already happened, so I appreciate you letting me chime in. Thank you.
So, no other questions, we can move on, unless you, okay. All right, the last item is it's an ordinance amendment related to Old City Height districts. So, this is the one where we're talking about architectural merit. The provision to earn extra height through architectural merit creates a lack of uncertainty for development teams, citizens, and the city. Additionally, its inferred implication has been that if you're not seeking an extra floor through merit, you can do a lesser building, or you may engage in another public realm that isn't so important. The Old City Height districts were substantially revised in 2017 after an 18-month-long contextual analysis that included many public meetings. The 2017 changes included opportunities for applicants to seek additional height through rezoning or architectural merit. However, many applicants are seeking additional height through both rezoning and architectural merit, potentially reaching 2 height districts beyond the original height district that was adopted in 2017 after that very detailed and lengthy analysis. So the proposed amendments that we'll also bring back to you in 2 weeks, you'll see the exact wording. The proposed amendments remove options for additional height through architectural merit. Keeps rezoning for additional height through, it keeps additional height through rezoning, but it incorporates more of enhancements into the criteria, a little bit deeper criteria into context, street widths, that kind of thing. It includes a provision for allowing affordable housing projects, which are 50% of the units or more are affordable. Those would be able to rezone up to 2 height districts. It will provide more certainty to development teams, architects, owners, and the community on projects when they are being planned, designed, and financed.
So,
A question on bullet 2.
Yeah.
The rezoning for additional height that incorporate additional and enhanced criteria.
Yeah.
What's an example of that
And I apologize, I didn't print that one.
That's okay.
So I think there is
30,000
this general tendency.
architectural merit.
Yeah, that's kind of what I.
There's sometimes a belief that it's easy to go through the rezoning and get extra height. And we want to nail that down. We want to give everybody who's a part of that decision some really measurable criteria so that it's same as seeking architectural merit. I mean, those are very different criteria, but it is more objective and measurable criteria.
Well, example 518, where it's zoned, but the east bay side, we could have 6-story straight out, but we moved the 6-story 25 feet away from the property line and keeping this, the line
And then as a
one of the examples.
follow-up, thank you, to include a provision for allowing affordable housing projects 50% or more to rezone up to 2 height districts.
That's
Would there be an opportunity, I can just see this happening, would there be an opportunity or a loophole where somebody said, oh, I got zoned for this, but now I'm going to pay into the city fund, so I don't have to have the affordable housing? Okay.
Well,
So you would be locked out of the fee in lieu.
Right. Basically, you got the zoning to do it.
It kind of has.
You're saying it's now,
Well, that's
saying
not-
it changes
Really
now,
Yeah.
you're saying it gets rezoned and then they change, this is not. So we've talked
Right.
about that and, I can get you information on that. That definitely has been discussed.
Okay, good.
So there's
I
two
just-
high districts. Suddenly we will have the buildings that's doing this.
And it would still become in front of you all.
So will we get, so I guess 2 weeks from tonight is when you hope for us to take a vote on approving this.
Well, so this is a change to the ordinance, right?
So
Yes.
this is city
So
council.
this
That's
is,
what-
so
I'm
this
sorry,
is just,
yes.
this is just an informational
not
discussion.
Right.
Well,
Because the other thing is a policy statement. But this, we got to change the ordinance. in order to do this.
so,
So what we would be seeking is sort of a resolution to support that.
I mean, there's
And we'll
there's a
bring you that
lot
in 2
in
weeks.
that. And a lot of potential opportunities for what's been going on to continue to go on and do it at 2 levels higher. And,
It also depends on what zone the property is. So,
but some of this is being diverted to zoning.
Well, so think about the 2-step where you get a floor by rezoning and then seek architectural merit. That floor by rezoning is virtually rubber stamped. So the additional criteria, whatever they may be, ought to also have some bearing on adding 2 additional floors for affordable housing. And since this is going before council, it's impossible for them to ignore an affordable housing issue. So there's going to have to be some addressing of that. I think this started a while back with some folks in town realizing that the additional height for architectural merit was just broken. It just wasn't working. It was always intended to be a carrot to provide for even better architecture. Because this came out when Duane came to Charleston and was asked by Mayor Riley, how can we improve the process to make the architecture better? And this was one of his ideas. And alongside a lot of his ideas, didn't really work out. So I've been agitating to remove the additional height based on architectural merit for a while. So I personally, I'm really enthused about the possibility of never having to argue over that again.
yeah. Buildings became broken pretty much.
I guess it really just sort of depends on what you work. Are y'all gonna have a draft ordinance language in 2 weeks?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, okay.
It'll be, we'll present,
Is that going to community development?
yes.
Even more reason to do this.
That's not something you could send us before then, is it? That'd be great.
Yeah.
Just trying to keep it high level. I mean, it would be something I would not wish for you to share.
Yeah.
And thinking about, we've talked about 2 height districts, and it's easy for me also that falls into 2 floors. It's not always 2 floors because we have districts that are 3.5. We have 2.5 to 3. We have 3.5. So there's some of these lower size buildings that 2 height districts don't actually equate to 2 floors. So, any questions before we open it up to the public?
Any public comment?
And for allowing me to be on the record with our comments. Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. On the Height District Ordinance amendments, we feel the proposal is a much needed revision that reflects the modern reality of new construction in Charleston, where developers are increasingly seeking to build bigger and taller. Though intended to incentivize exemplary architecture for larger buildings, requests for height waivers based on the vague concept of architectural merit have become so commonplace that it's almost default. Charleston is one of the most unique historic cities in the country, and every new construction project should be held to the highest architectural standard as defined in the BAR principles. However, we acknowledge there is a balancing act, especially today as affordable places to rent or buy are in short supply. Therefore, we support and commend the proposed height district rezoning criteria that incentivize builders to include affordable and workforce housing units so that Charlestonians can make a living and reside downtown. Thank you.
Any discussion?
We need that.
Thank y'all.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I know this has been
Thank you,
a
Tori.
big task, and I know y'all faced considerable pressure from on high to do something about this. And knowing you face considerable pressure from us if what y'all proposed would defang the institution. So I appreciate the balancing act.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, we don't need one. You just get up and
All
run out.
right, see y'all.